Governor Cuomo has come up with a plan for supplying replacement power for Indian Point, and that plan is well underway. Number 2, the former commissioner of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Gregory Yachko, has announced that all 104 nuclear reactors in this country suffer from a fatal flaw that would jeopardize safety in the event of an emergency shutdown, and that they should all be closed. And finally, the Government Accountability Office has issued a statement that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Federal Emergency Management Agency grossly underestimates the amount of evacuation that would occur in the event of an emergency outside the 10-mile evacuation zone. Now, does the Nuclear Regulatory Commission change their approach to this facility on any of these grounds? Do they look at the Government Accountability Office report and say, we've got to take more seriously the issue of shadow evacuation? We've got to take more seriously the fact that we have 20 million people within 50 miles of this plant and no way to evacuate them? No, that is not even part of the relicensing hearing for Indian Point. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is going through the motions on Indian Point. They're not considering the government report about shadow evacuation and the fact that we could not evacuate Indian Point in the event of an emergency. They're not considering fire safety adequately. They're not forcing Entergy to move spent fuel to dry cask storage. They're not considering the earthquake risk, which they themselves have assessed as being greatest at this plant of any of America's reactors. So considering that Nuclear Regulatory Commission does not take these risks seriously, we the people are going to show these risks. We're going to do our own assessment at this press conference, and we're going to announce why Indian Point cannot, must not, should not be relicensed. Remember, Governor Cuomo is working to provide replacement power. The Government Accountability Office has certified that the evacuation plan is deeply flawed because it doesn't consider shadow evacuation. And this is the most at-risk plant for meltdown in the event of an earthquake in the entire U.S.
You're not answering my question. I ask a specific question. I'm making the assumption that your assessment of low liability likelihood is accurate. What happens if there is a major catastrophic accident? The last I've read is that the EPA, FEMA, and the NRC are playing kick the can down to the next person about who assumes responsibility for cleanup because the costs would be so enormous. And as far as I know from the Price-Anderson Reauthorization Act testimony, which I spent all of yesterday reading what I could find, the industry itself says that the consequences would be way too expensive and catastrophic for them to possibly assume the liability, which is why you have to have Price-Anderson put the bulk of the cost on the public. I'm honestly asking you to say for the record, there is no plan for if there is a horrible accident. There is none. You've said it in thousands of papers. It's there in the congressional record. It's there in the record of meetings between different federal agencies. I want you to state it for the purposes of this meeting, just so the public can be aware of that fact. Because I think that's a sort of important issue.
I wish I could answer your question in an affirmative way, but I can't, and you know that. You know that I cannot answer that question and say everybody in the room is going to be taken care of in a traumatic event, okay? It happens worldwide. That is why so much effort has to be placed on assuring that such an event cannot occur on the soil of this country. And that's what we're trying to do.
Private company. Why should they go on the back of us?
Well, hold on. If we have a question, we're going to have to do it in a card. Bill, we can either you've answered the question.
I mean, she's asked an impossible question and answer to her satisfaction.
Right. So
right, Michelle.
Yeah. And I do want to say this, on behalf of myself, and I think a lot of people in this room, we really understand you guys are just sort of thrown up there by your agency. You can't say what's in your heart. You can't say what's on your own mind. There is a certain wall of falseness that stands here. I'm going to assume that as you go back to your hotel rooms tonight, each one of you bangs your head against the wall and says, "Oh no, I know, I know, I'm so sorry." So it's a plea, as a mom, please, when you go back behind that wall, don't let your agency get away with keeping this plant open. I don't care whether that it's a 1 in 100 chance or 1 in a million. It's the New York metropolitan region. It's the United States. There's no other part in the country that puts this many people at risk.
All right, thank you.
You have a situation about to happen in September that I understand hasn't happened before in this country, where you're going to have an unlicensed nuclear reactor operating in this country, and that's an awful situation. Now, we're about to enter unfamiliar territory because of that. And we've been told for years, well, you can't handle the evacuation plan in the relicensing hearing because we just don't do that. We've been told for years, we can't handle the question of dry cask storage or earthquake risk in the relicensing hearing because we just don't do that. But now you allow unlicensed plants to operate. So you have to change the rules. You have to add the fact that this plant is unevacuatable. This region is unevacuatable to your licensing criteria. Everybody in this room knows that that evacuation plan won't work. Even without the GAO report, you know it's crazy talk. But with that GAO report, you need to hold a licensing hearing on this issue. And I challenge you to do so. And I ask you whether you will do so. Now, about 8 months ago, the Circuit Court of Appeals in Washington found that you had not adequately considered the safety implications and the environmental implications of having no long-term spent fuel storage plan available. You have no Yucca Mountain plan, you have no plan to make a plan. And so you're working on new environmental impact analysis of the environmental impact of storing too much spent fuel for too long in pools that are too unprotected. And so I ask you, will you add that to your relicensing hearing? Will you acknowledge that you do not have an adequate means of dealing with spent fuel that keeps on piling up? And at the very least, will you order this company, operating one of the most profitable enterprises on the face of the planet, to move more fuel than the minimum they have to dry cask so that they can fit the new fuel in and reduce the density of the fuel in those pools? So 2 questions. Will you add these issues to your relicensing hearing because they belong in the relicensing hearing? And will you direct this company to move more fuel to dry cask storage? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.